Welcome everyone to our second AI After Hours event, gathering here at OnLogic. Thank you, OnLogic, for opening up your room tonight. My name is Dave Bradbury. I'm with the Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies, or VCET. I'd like you all to settle in, grab some food for the interview portion of the meeting, and then we're going to get your questions and hopefully for some lively Q&A, because I know John likes that. Today we're thrilled to be joined by serial entrepreneur, former hyperscaler executive, founder of DVX Ventures, a fellow mountain biker, a longtime part-time Vermonter, and author of The Algorithm, Jon McNeill. Welcome, and thank you, John, for joining us tonight.
I'm psyched to be here.
All right.
Thank
you. So let's try to get some context. Why'd you write The Algorithm, and what about this moment in time makes it hyper-relevant?
I was super affected by this, by a handful of books in my career. And one of them was a book that some of you might have read called The Goal. And I read it early on, like when it was written. It was written by an MIT professor who was going to write a textbook on manufacturing. And a couple of his colleagues said, nobody's ever going to read a textbook on manufacturing. Write a novel. Make it spicy. And so he did. It's a super fast read. Today, even when people ask me, like, if I could read one business book, what is it? I hand them The Goal. And so I wanted, as we developed this management system or this innovation system at Tesla and SpaceX, I felt like the world needed to know this. And if it could affect one 25-year-old like I was affected by The Goal, it would be worth it. So, but I didn't consider myself an author, et cetera. And then I got to know Walter Isaacson when he was writing the Elon biography. We spent quite a bit of time together. And so he invited me on a couple stops on his book tour. And so as I was researching the questions I wanted to ask him, I dove into Walter's history. I know Walter as the Jobs biographer, as the Einstein biographer, and as Elon's biographer. I didn't know that Walter was a former CEO himself. He's a two-time CEO. He was the CEO of Time Inc. at its peak, and he was the CEO of CNN, where he ran a turnaround, and his first action of that turnaround was to fire Lou Dobbs, which was a very controversial thing at the time. And so Walter and I were on a book tour, and I said, hey, like, you're a former CEO. Why aren't you writing about the very specific way that Jobs runs Apple, or the very specific way that Elon has applied this thing called the algorithm at SpaceX and Tesla? And he said, because I don't write business books, which I thought was a really interesting response. He said, I write character books. I put a camera on the wall, I expose you to the character, and I let you make a call what you're going to walk away from that character with and take away and what you're going to leave behind. But he said, John, you should write that book. And I said, well, I'm not an author. I'm not your guy. And we walked off stage, and he said, you're going to write this book. I'm going to show you how. So that's how this thing started, was with Walter giving me a big shove.
So it was physical contact and a push that versus some sort of a global condition that you felt the algorithm was timely for.
And it's now timely. If a couple of us were talking about this a few minutes ago. If you watched the SpaceX IPO video, or you saw the deck, slide 2 is the algorithm, which was really cool. Because Brett, the CFO at SpaceX, said, hey, look, if you're going to invest in this company, you need to understand the operating system by which the innovation happens. And so we need to explain the algorithm to you. And so he put up 3 versions of the Raptor engine, Raptor 1, 2, 3, and 4. And by Raptor, or 1, 2, and 3, and by the Raptor 3, it has 50% of the parts in a rocket engine that Raptor 1 did, as a result of applying this method of innovation.
Well, that's a great segue into some of the components of the algorithm. They're on the board behind you here no one has to take notes if they don't want to, but I want to talk about the question every requirement. I mean, that's sort of just is first principles thinking and sort of rooted in that. Like, why start there?
Because it turns out there's a lot of requirements that are handed to you, theoretically by the market, theoretically by the organization, that aren't real. And when you start to question them, they turn out to be dumb stuff you don't need to do. So one example of this is is in the book, so apologies if you've read it. But when we started to sell cars online, so I joined Tesla when the Model S was the only product we had. We had about $1.8 billion in revenue. And while I was there, we introduced the X, the 3, and the Y, and went from $1.8 billion in revenue to $20 billion in revenue in 30 months. And key to that, I mean, it's a hard business. In 30 months, it's just not like software you're plugging in servers. We're building factories, building supply chains, building distribution, opening 33 countries, creating our software in 36 languages. It was a lot of work to be done. And there's a ton of creativity that happened during that process. But one of the things we had to figure out how to do was to sell cars online. And nobody had tried to sell $50,000 to $60,000 things online sight unseen. And for any of you that are in e-com, you know the rule that clicks are the inverse to conversion. The more clicks you have, the less conversion you get. And we had 64 clicks in our purchase process, 44 of which were the loan and lease documents. And so this is an example of questioning everything. So I went to our general counsel and I handed him the 12-page loan document and the 12-page lease document. That if you've purchased a car or leased a car, you know this, you've got to initial a bunch of paragraphs, you've got to initial pages, sign at the end. And so there are 44 clicks to get through that process. And so I asked our general counsel, his name's Todd, I said, Todd, can you come back to me and tell me how many of these paragraphs are a requirement of law or regulation? And he came back 24 hours later and said, precisely none. And I said, what? And he said, none. None of these are a requirement of law. He said, these were, all of these paragraphs were built by well-meaning corporate attorneys trying to protect their bank. But none of these are a requirement of law. The case law is settled. If you don't pay for your car, if you don't make your monthly payment, whoever is the lender on that can repo it. That case law is settled. You don't need 12 pages to say that. And so I said, can we get down to a lease or loan doc that is essentially one paragraph? Here's the price of the car, here's the interest rate, the term, the monthly payment, sign here. And he said, we can't. And I gave him a hug. He's not much of a hugger. And he kind of pulled back. He's like, why are you hugging me? And I said, because you've just taken 44 clicks out of the process. We're going to go from $2 billion to $20 billion in sales as a result of this requirement that nobody for 100 years in the car industry had questioned. You question a requirement, now you open up an advantage that other people don't have.
And what would be an example of maybe language that this audience uses? Is it best practice says we do this, or our standard operating procedures do this? Are those,
it's all those things.
Make you,
it's all those things.
Shake?
So we would literally hunt. Like if somebody said, this part is a requirement in the car, we would say, we need the name of the engineer who created that requirement. And we're going to bring them in to meet with the president or the CEO, and you got to explain why this is here. When you start to inject that into a culture, people know that's coming. And so what do? They skip unnecessary stuff. They skip unnecessary requirements. They don't build it in. But it's not perfect, and unnecessary stuff grows up over time. And so you start to really push the creativity. So in a language that this group would understand, from a first principles basis, we were talking about this a couple of minutes ago too. A 3 nanometer chip has room for 8 atoms. And as you know, China hasn't been able to get their hands on many 3 nanometer chips, NVIDIA chips. So they start to question the requirement of do you have to do pre-training, post-training, training, post-training of LLMs with 8-bit calculations. Because the way it works on an 8-atom chip is every atom is a bit. And so the calcs that run through NVIDIA's chips are 8-bit calcs. And so what the people at DeepSeek did was they questioned that requirement. Do you have to use 8-bit calcs? They couldn't get chips that had 8, so they split the bits. They split their calculations into 4-bit, 4-bit. They had to rejoin them at the end. But that is questioning requirements, and that allows DeepSeek to develop a model under huge technical constraints that other people don't, because they're questioning the requirement of 8-bit calcs. which the whole world said you had to do to reach this kind of sophistication in answers.
Is this first question every requirement, is that often where an organization or team is most resistant? Or, is it equally ranked throughout the 5?
I think this is like the biggest breakthrough, because essentially it's a combination of simplification, like can I get rid of stuff, and it's questioning status quo, which is really uncomfortable, because even like you're asking that question, Dave, I was thinking about how many times when I got the pushback on a requirement, did I respond sort of defensively on my heels versus on my toes saying, yeah, let's go kill this thing. And it was more often because I think as humans, we're complicators, we're not simplifiers naturally. And especially if you've been part of coming up with a pretty cool, complex solution, you're most likely defensive.
So from that place of defensiveness, right, you get some areas to focus on. And let's talk about the next one, delete every step possible or practical. Just dive into that a little bit with an example or two.
This is another step in simplification, which so what I have teams do is, first of all, the culture at SpaceX or Tesla is, as a senior leader, you have to understand the details of the way this business system works and the way the physical production system works, et cetera, the way the product works. And it's not micromanagement, it's just like you got to understand it if you're going to lead it. And so I would have that expectation of the people that work for me, of managers that were in our organization. And so the condition for that, the test for that, was I would ask them to map a process with sticky notes on big panes of glass. So map the major process steps in this system. I'm an engineer by training, and I really like systemic thinking. So the way you do that is just draw the system. And then underneath that, draw the sub-steps. And then to get to the deletion stage, the first forcing function of that is you ask the team to go up to the wall and circle any step in the process that the customer pays you for. It turns out that they don't pay you for purchase orders, they don't pay you for tracking systems, they don't pay you for quality management systems, they don't pay for any of that. They're paying essentially for the key components of the product that get produced. So if we're a restaurant, they're paying for the ingredients, they're paying for the chef or cooking team, they're paying for the plating. They're not paying for the person that sits in the back and orders the food. They're not paying for the reservationist. They're not paying for the runners. They're not paying for any of that. And so when you really circle what they pay for, then you can start to make candidates for what can get eliminated. And if you eliminate those, the process is simpler, and by definition, it will go faster. So the deletion stage is really important.
And do you think you need to complete the mapping of the system first before you start deleting?
Yeah, because you have to be
start
systemic.
At the end or the beginning?
Like one of the big sins in our culture is the word arbitrary. And if you can't explain why you're working in the process where you're working, that's arbitrary, if you cannot explain it. And the last thing you wanted to be described by is that adjective. So yeah, like I want you to understand, like, systemically, here's the biggest lever we have in this process. Here's why, and here's why we're applying AI at this point. Because it's an optimization problem, and we can affect the speed of the whole system's ability to generate cash. That's why I want to know that. I want you to be able to point to why we're working here versus working other places. And intuition leads you often to the wrong place. The analysis doesn't, typically.
You included in the book the sort of paradox of choice, right? And how sometimes too much complexity just overwhelms the consumer. And I go back to the jam study, right? Like, you put out 10 types of jam, 3% of the people might buy. You put out 3 jams, 10% of the people buy. Like, how do you, as you design a product or a website or an offering, right? There's feature creep, there's product, everything is special to somebody. How do you sugar that off?
I think a real disciplined understanding of your customer. And so, like, I got this question when I first joined the GM board. They said, how did you guys decide to have 2 SUV models? And that was a loaded question, because if you just look at the Chevrolet product lineup, it starts with a Trax, then a Equinox, then a Tracker, then a Traverse, then a Blazer, then a Tahoe, then a Suburban. So they have 7 SUVs just in the Chevy lineup. So it was a loaded question. And I said, well, that was kind of easy. We went to your dealers. They didn't know we'd done this. But we went to your dealers and said, how do you as dealers, they're the distribution channel in the business, how do you order amongst these 7? And they said, oh, we only lot 2 of these. We only put 2 on the lot. And they're configured this way, because that's what the market wants. The market doesn't want 7 of these things, and it is a paradox of choice thing. It confuses the hell out of my customer when they come in, so I got to make it simpler. And so we basically based the Y and the X off of that insight. We only had 2. And the Model Y is now still, it's kind of miraculous that I could say this, the Model Y is the best-selling car in the world. It outsells the Camry, it outsells the Prius, name a car, it's 1.6 million of those things go out the door every year. What does that mean? We have one supply chain, one distribution chain, one manufacturing process. We don't have, if we had 7 of those things, we don't have 7 supply chains, 7 engineering specs, 7 manufacturing methods, 7 distribution methods, 7 warranty programs, 7 financing programs. Like, it just simplifies the business. And so the EBIT margins on that vehicle are twice what GM's are.
So as we're cutting out steps, how do you know you've gone too far?
When either quality suffers, or the customer is screaming, I don't want that feature back. And oftentimes, or the process requires it to continue to go at the rate that you need it to go. So we would often say cut until something is screaming to get back on that Post-it note wall. And when it's screaming to get back and it's got a good reason, we probably have cut too far. So we do have to go back and add that step back in, or add that feature back in, or whatever.
And do you recommend that as sort of the instinct overcut, or cut maybe more than come back?
Yeah, it's kind of like weeding a
rather
garden.
than gradually
It's kind of like weeding a garden, or mowing a garden. I got to sneak out at lunch for a gravel ride today, and they were mowing ditches in the Mad River Valley. And if you're going to cut those to a foot high, you're going to be back in a few weeks. If you cut them to 2 inches, which they do, you're going to be back in 6 weeks. So you might as well just mow to that lower level if you can.
So one of John's first businesses in high school was mowing lawns, so
exactly. It's a theme.
It's a theme there.
I appreciate the mowers.
Can you talk about innovation by subtraction and how that sort of helps the simplify and optimize piece?
Yeah, I think that Raptor engines is the way I would describe rocket engines. It is the furthest humanity has pushed engineering. It is the most difficult engineering on the planet. And because it requires all the elements, basically. And so when you can reduce the part count by 50%, it's really an engineering feat of elegance, that Raptor 3 engine. But the cost to launch is 90% less because of both the engine and the reusability of the fuselage. It's 90% less than competition. So there's a reason SpaceX owns 90% of launch, because it costs 90% less on a kilogram basis to stick something up in low orbit. And so that is the best example I have of addition by subtraction. You subtract 50% of the parts, reuse a key part, and all of a sudden you've changed the economics of the business by 90%. And you've created almost a permanent advantage to yourself. We were still blowing rockets up in 2014, and Blue Origin is blowing rockets up now in 2026. That's a 12-year advantage, and Lockheed can't even do it yet. They don't even have the chance to blow stuff up yet, because they're not trying the reusability thing. So that subtraction leads to very different economics, and leads to long-term, durable competitive advantage.
And talk about the manufacturing element here. I think one of the things I found really interesting was the difference between cycle time, right, and touch time.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
All right, so you can do this on almost any, you can do this on software development, you can do this in a lot of different places. But to make it easy, many of us have been in to get your car repaired for any kind of issue. And at the end of that car repair, you get a bill. And the bill says, here's how much we spent on parts, and here's how many hours of labor this job took. The average labor on a car repair job is 4 hours across the board. But the average cycle time from the time you drop off your keys to the time you get your keys back is a day and a half. So people are taking a day and a half to do 4 hours worth of work. That's the difference between cycle time and touch time. So what is that? That's your opportunity. And if you could do it in 4 hours versus the industry standard of 16, you're going to have people beating a path to your repair shop. So that's why that is such a helpful tool for people to figure out cycle time versus touch time. Because if the thing is not being touched, it's waste, basically. So you could take, hey, and this happens now super rapidly in automated development cycles, but hey, we've developed this chunk of code, it's waiting for QA, and then it's going to wait for the deployment team. All that wait time is waste time, and so you should be able to figure out a way to eliminate that. And then you can look like a hero, because all you eliminate is the wait.
Is the benefit of that mostly internal or external to the customer? Or is it equally, where do you see the most benefit, right? Your productivity on the inside, or is it my frustration dropping my car off and not knowing when I'm going to get it back?
So this insight led to a couple different, there was a second order effect and a third order effect. So let's say the average job is 4 hours, but then if you break that bell curve down, you figure out that 60% of the jobs are less than an hour. And so if you can do a job in less than an hour, why would you trouble the customer to come to you is the next question that we asked. So we questioned the requirement of the auto industry, which is if your car's broken, you have to go somewhere to get it fixed, get a loaner car, go through that whole process, get your car fixed, now go back with the loaner car and reverse the whole thing. And if 60% of repairs are less than an hour, why would you run the customer through that? Why wouldn't you just go to them? And so through that insight, we invented mobile service, which customers love. So to your question, Dave, it's a customer benefit. I get these magic elves to show up to my home or my office, they fix my car, and they disappear, and I didn't have to do anything. That is magical. And so now if I'm going to go change brands, one of my first questions is, do you do mobile service? If the answer is no, I'm probably going to be loyal to the brand because I've had this experience and it's life-changing and I'm not going back. So a lot of benefit inures to the end user, but it turns out is much more economically beneficial not to build fixed plant operations to have people bring their car in for a 1 hour thing.
But if you had to wait one beneficiary first.
One of the cool things, one of the best insights I got out of, I didn't get a lot out of my college training, but one of the best insights I got was a philosophy professor. And this philosophy professor was from India. And he and I I was fascinated by his topic. And so we would get together in office hours. And he would often stop me with what you just did. He would say, John or Dave, you just presented me with an either or. Either one party benefits or the other party benefits. And he would say to me, he tried to pound this into my skull, that is a very Western way of thinking. Westerners think in either or. Eastern philosophy and Eastern logic starts with both and. Why can't I have both? So when I hear that question, I'm like, false assumption. It doesn't have to be either or. It's not a zero-sum game. We can do both. We can both serve the customer and make better economics for ourselves. And so there isn't a hierarchy for us because it's a both and. And when you get teams shifted from either or, which is trade-offs, and a lot of that stuff's illusory. It's not real. And try to get them to focus on, no, we got to deliver these things. And a process can be good, fast, and cheap, not pick two, pick three. That is a both and kind of thinking versus an either or thinking.
Yeah, I mean, either or sort of gets to a scarcity mindset, right? Us or you, my
or zero
team,
sum.
your team, exactly.
Yep. Yeah.
So the automate last element. I'm really curious in this age of AI, which seems to require founders and teams, automate first. Like, what? Did your head just explode that they're skipping to the end? Or
It does now, because I've seen the carnage of that approach.
well, let's talk about carnage.
So one of the things that we teach our startups, so I run a firm where we're zero stage. And it's because I started and scaled and sold 6 companies before I went to Tesla. We started several businesses inside of Tesla and outside of Tesla. And so I kept trying to hone this practice. And we learned a lot of lessons that you can read about in the book about why somebody like an Elon Musk would say automate last, which is super counterintuitive. But the short answer is when you automate a flawed process, you just get to the bad answer faster. Or you run through the same spaghetti faster. Versus if you pull back and really rethink what you're doing, test it, and then automate, you can actually come up with much better insights. So the best examples of this are started with Amazon. Bezos and Wilkie and a couple of others were in a room in Seattle, and they were designing this workflow to order and deliver books. And they made themselves do it manually first. And this was just really a gut insight that Jeff Wilkie had. Jeff's a longtime president and CEO of the consumer business at Amazon. You know him for the 6-page memo or the 2-way door versus 1-way door. Almost all the management principles came out of Wilkie's head. And so they put up a site to order books, and you would order books, and they had no fulfillment operation. They would run down the street to a bookstore, buy the book off the shelf, box it, and send it so they could map the process. And so they started to teach this at Stanford. It's called, at Stanford they call it concierge, which basically means if you're going to start a business, run it manually first. So another example of this is 5 CS majors at Stanford, undergrads, had this idea to do food delivery, and so they put up, their professors were telling them, you got to do this manually first. And they're like, all right, cool. They're all CS majors. They wanted to code so bad, but they're like, all right, cool. So they put up PDFs of every restaurant's menu in Palo Alto, and they had a phone number at the bottom. And the phone rang in their dorm room. And they would take the order, they would run to the restaurant, order the food, process the payment on a central credit card that they had, and then go deliver the food to the end customer and take payment from that end customer. And they ran this process manually for months, honing it, and then automated at the end. You know that team is DoorDash. And DoorDash ran manual for months because they had this insight that you will have a much cleaner process at the end of the day if you automate last. Their key competitor at the time, Grubhub, had a group of CS majors at Northwestern who automated first. And they got stuck under something everybody can relate to, technical debt, and they couldn't iterate and change as fast as the DoorDash guys could. And it's because there's just a difference when you automate last. Automation, whether it comes in the form of AI or deterministic code, or where it is a form of cement that hardens once you lay it down, and it hardens itself in the form of tech debt, and it takes a jackhammer to get it out. So you want to put that off as long as possible.
Great. And you also talk about 3 cultural elements or traits or ingredients as well. And I assume these are both and,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I was really struck by the broadening of product as it's defined to include customer experiences. It's just not the bells and whistles people want. I'm literally looking at everything we do at VCET going, oh my gosh. We think we have empathy, but have we really mapped out their experience, what it's like to become a coworker or to go through a seed funding process with us? So
Yeah.
Any great example of just the aha moment where that showed up, you had to have it?
Yeah, so what Dave's talking about is really broadening the aperture, especially of engineers, to understand the entire customer journey. And so for a century and a half, car manufacturers define themselves as we design and manufacture cars. We do not sell them. They get sold into an independent distribution channel called the dealership. It's a local entrepreneur who's going to be our third-party distribution. So our job is to design and build cars and distribute them into the channel. And so we asked ourselves one day, and it sounds obvious now, but it wasn't so obvious at the time. From the very beginning of electric vehicles, what's the biggest thing that is the hurdle for people to buy them? Range anxiety. You're super worried about running out of juice. And so one day in our management team meetings were largely brainstorming sessions every week. And so we're like brainstorming about this. And J.B. Straubel, who's co-founder of Tesla, now the founder of Redwood Materials, super bright, strategic mind, probably the best one at Tesla. And he said, like, guys, I think we have to get into the fueling business. And the rest of the people around the table were like, what are you talking about? We design, manufacture, in our case we sell, but why would we get into the fueling business? That's going to be the business of Shell and Exxon, and they're going to have to convert these gas stations into charging stations, et cetera. And he said, I don't think that's going to happen by itself in time for us to grow. I think we're going to have to like get into the fueling business. And so that was the kernel that started the supercharger network. And we end up, so just to put this in context for you, anytime you build an automotive manufacturing plant, it's a $5 billion check. And we ended up spending $700 million to build the supercharger network around the world and enable a whole demand shift to electric. Because we broadened our aperture and got into the fueling business. But we weren't just getting into the fueling business. To do that at our level, we said two things had to be true. It had to be 99.9% uptime reliability, so when you plugged in, it worked. And there had to be an immediate handshake with the payment mechanism so that you didn't even have to get your wallet out. Those were the two design features. And the engineers came up with a way to do that. And it still is the only charging network today. It's been around 12 years. Ironically, another 12-year competitive advantage, a moat that exists where the Tesla charging experience is unlike any other in the world. Maybe ex BYD in China. Or Geely in China, but it's unlike any in the Western world.
I can't imagine an EV structure in our country without the Tesla stations out there. I mean, we're seeing actually locally Beta Technologies, right?
Right, exactly.
They're making electric planes,
Yeah,
but they're also
totally
building a charging
They're building
network.
a charging network at
Yeah.
airports, which is, it's just necessary.
And so they get a 12-year advantage out of that, right?
Right, but can you imagine like going to the engineers at Boeing and you have to say, like, you guys are going to design an excellent fueling product for jets, and they'd be like, there is nobody in this company that knows how to do that, nor has any interest in it. And so then Beta will have this advantage when Boeing tries to enter that electric plane market after Beta proves its viability. They're going to have this wide open space because competitors just won't move out of the status quo.
So many of the founders that we deal with, we advise over 300 a year, right, just in our little state. And many of them aren't technical founders. And under this point of injecting urgency and accountability at the leadership meetings, do you have to be a technical CEO?
I don't think you have to be, but it sure helps if you're selling a digital or technical product. It sure helps to know the right questions to ask if you've actually had your hands on the keyboard at some point and you built. It really helps, but you don't have to be. I think there are plenty of non-technical founders who have learned it. Bezos is one. He's a philosophy major. Chesky at Airbnb is he's a designer from RISD. You don't have to be technical, but in those cases, both of those individuals have taught themselves the technology in the business and have become expert at it.
Yep. We usually we love teams that have a hustler, a hacker, and a hipster, right?
I like that.
And one founder can be two of those three traits.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
Or they make up for it through a co-founder or some other mechanism, and it again just build it, sell it, and then make it beautiful and desirable.
And that last one is like really, like I totally agree with Chesky when he says there ought to be a member of the senior management team needs to be a designer. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning about Apple, because Steve Jobs was the ultimate designer. And the article this morning was how they're trying to rebuild Apple's design mojo because they lost its seat at the table. And I agree with you, like product has to be beautiful.
And they were making fun of Snap for trying to do with their glasses, that they're like,
Totally.
dear God, give it to Apple, right? Let them go.
Yeah.
All right, I want to get back to, let's talk about Jon a little bit here. You grew up in Kearney, Nebraska, right? About 35,000 people today, so
Yeah.
Burlington size-ish, a little bit smaller.
A little smaller.
What advantage did you get growing up in a rural place, if there was one?
So I would say like the place I grew up when I was there was like 10 to 12,000, so it was like Barrie. Or it's like, I don't know, it's like, it's way smaller than Rutland. It's like White River Junction, et cetera. So, but it was rural, it was agricultural. So the place I grew up, we were the central school for an hour radius, which meant everybody was farmers and ranchers. And so the odd thing about those cultures, and I know they exist here, is that everybody's kind of on the same socioeconomic level. We're all subsistence farmers, we're all poor, essentially. So that means you're helping your neighbor, you're fixing stuff to make it last, you're welding tractor parts because you can't afford the new part, all that sort of stuff. And so you just grow up in this community that is wired to help each other because you kind of need to, because none of us had the resources to go buy something new. And so we're always pitching in and helping, which was a great way to grow up. It's a tough way to grow up because the dairy cows need to be milked 375 days a year at 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. and they don't take a vacation for that 365 days. So it's a tough living, but it's also it's a cool community.
Thank you for sharing that. I already ruined your first job with the lawn business. Let me just riff on that. Did you get into being an entrepreneur just, was it for money or to buy a bike, or did you just get pissed off by things you saw and thought you could do better? Was it hubris or opportunity that you saw?
So I was like, because we couldn't afford much, at 8 years old, I went to my dad and I said, I really want a pair of Nikes. And he said, we can't afford those. You know we can't. But if you make the money for them, you can buy them. Well, I was 8 years old in third grade, and it's like, how am I going to get that much money? For me, like that was an enormous pile of money. And he's like, well, why don't you look around and find something that people will pay you for, but a lot of people need, but they don't like to do. And it turned out that mowing ditches was that thing. And so I went door to door as an 8-year-old and begged people, and I think they couldn't say no to an 8-year-old, so I started mowing ditches. And within months, I had the money for those shoes. And so for me, it wasn't about like this need to create a company or hubris or anything else. For me, it was like, that was the first time I experienced agency. It's like, oh my God, like this ownership and action over a situation can yield something really cool. And that's where I kind of got addicted to starting businesses, because I was like, I got to find a way to pay for my college. I got to find a way to eat. And I learned at that age that one answer to that question can be starting something. And that's what I got addicted to, I think.
So we have a bunch of recently graduated students, college students here, and young alum. And what kind of advice are you giving these folks right now going into the marketplace?
My daughter's a CS major. She graduated college 4 years ago, and she often describes her skill set as obsolete because she didn't code anymore. But her key job now is architecture and asking the right questions. So what I tell kids is like, liberal arts is back. Like if you know how to ask the right questions, think systematically, design systems in a systematic way, those skill sets are back, because the technical skills I was trained as a CS major are totally obliterated. And so I think technical skills are getting commoditized super fast, and logic and reasoning and taste capabilities are now at a premium. So I think that's when people say, like, what should I study or whatever, like, I'm like, run to those skill sets.
Just to raise a hand, who has a liberal arts background?
Yeah, me too.
All
Like I was
right.
half and half, yeah.
All right, pretty cool. I want to ask just more broadly about sort of the AI landscape and just, some of these national decisions, policies going on. I read, we'll get to Bernie in a second, but I was reading about the CEO at Microsoft was saying, hey, these language models, they haven't asked for social permission, which I thought was a neat way to put, like, hey, we're going to take your data, we're going to contextualize it, we're going to blast you with the information. And he just seemed to say, like, gosh, is there a moment or an ability to sort of, for them to earn trust, to earn permission to be the overlords, the information that is factual? Like, I just found it just really coming from one of the biggest companies in the world that owns our lives mostly, to say that. Like, any reaction to that social permission concept?
I think, I think Satya's onto something, as he usually is, early. And so when Satya says something, I tend to listen because he's been early and right so many times. And he is a really morally grounded individual. Like the first time we met, like anytime I get to meet somebody like that, like a lot of you, I have a few questions I really want to ask. And so the first time I met Satya, I said, hey, look, what's the most powerful tool in your talent selection, like tool chest? And he said, oh, I ask all candidates one question. Whom do you mentor? I said, why do you want to know that? I think I know, but why do you want to know? He said, because you can't mentor unless you're skilled at both the subject and communication. And you can't mentor unless you're given that privilege by somebody else. So mentors have followership. And if that's his first question on talent selection, it tells you a lot about the individual, which is another reason why I listen to this guy, because I think he's a very grounded, very good leader of humans. He's got a great humanity to him. And but at the same time, like, he understands marketing too, and he understands how mismarketed this whole LLMs have been. When you've got the CEOs of Anthropic and OpenAI, it turns out they were wrong. They may not be wrong in the long run, but they're wrong over the last 3 years. It hasn't obliterated the job market. We have seen more engineers hired, not less. We've seen more software engineers hired, not less. We've seen more lawyers hired, not less. And so he's making the point where, like, these guys have really screwed up the product positioning, and they scared the hell out of the market, which is people that are going to use the product, people that are going to allow data centers in their backyards, et cetera. Really screwed it up. And so I think the point of that article and that interview over the weekend was, like, this needs to be repositioned, and he's not wrong.
One of the 12 companies you've started, DVX Ventures, is Vista Shares, right? ETF family of funds, and two of them stuck out to me. POW, right, which is really about the energized world ahead. Yeah. And then also, what do you call it, the AI super cycle, AIS, right? Is that, did I get that right? And just talk about why those two were sort of the early launches. One of them's up 238% this morning, the other one's up 58% year on year, so wow. And how that ties back to sort of the algorithm and this pursuit of supply chain and things you must have, not things you maybe want to have.
Yeah, so this is this whole process of innovation kind of encapsulated. So the way we start companies is we kind of serendipitously trip across stuff, and then we just start to pull the string. And often these are things that we have no idea, we've never had experience with. So this one, this business came out of a very odd, unique starting point. So I was being interviewed a couple of years ago on CNBC on Squawk Box about how lucky we are as investors to be alive in a time where there's multiple super cycles happening at the same time. Like, if we were alive 100 years ago, as an investor or a entrepreneur, you had the Industrial Revolution, that was it. We got one super cycle, lasted 90 years. And then in the early 90s, the internet super cycle started. And it was, if you were like in your 50s, that's the one you got as an entrepreneur or as an investor. Because it took 30 years for the mobile revolution to start. And then it took another 10 years for the AI revolution to start. And now, all of a sudden, at the same time, we've got AI as a super cycle. We've got electrification as a super cycle. So the world is moving from fuel source. We have robotics, biotech, and space. So aren't we lucky? That was the point of the interview we were diving into. So the cameras go off, and Sorkin says, how do I invest in these super cycles? I said, Andrew, I'm sure there are some great ETFs that are built for this. Let me look at a few, and I'll text you some ideas. So I get in the car to go across Manhattan, and I decided to open the biggest at the time electrification supercycle fund. And I know a lot bit about what goes into the electric grid, and I know a lot about goes into electric cars. So I had a sense of the stocks I was going to see. I opened up that fund. I looked at its holdings. Its top 5 holdings were Amazon, Google, Apple, NVIDIA, and Microsoft. You're chuckling because you're right. Like, those have nothing to do with the electrification. You can't put an NVIDIA chip in an electric car for $20,000. That economic model doesn't work. And I looked at that and said, gosh, shame on the ETF industry. They're selling a product for 75 bips that somebody can buy for 7. Those 5 stocks are the Mag 7. You can go buy that either in the form of the Mag 7 or the QQQ because it's weighted on a market cap basis. So I quickly texted Andrew back and I said, don't buy these products, they're crap. I have another idea. So we started to question why ETFs, exchange-traded funds, are built the way they're built. They're all built on a market cap weighted basis, which means you take the value of each company that is in that sector, and the biggest market caps get the biggest weighting. And so let's say I want to capture the AI infrastructure build, data centers. If I put NVIDIA into that basket at $5 trillion, and one other fact I know is there's 5 times the fiber in an AI data center than in a regular data center. So I know that Corning, who provides that fiber, is going to do well. But Corning's only a $100 billion company. So like if I put a $5 trillion company and a $100 billion company into the same pot, I get 95% exposure to this thing, and I get 5% exposure to this thing. And so we just questioned, like, why are people building these this way? And the answer we got back is because everybody does it. Clue number 1. All right. How else could we do this? And we said, well, our goal here is that we want to give investors, we want to democratize what hedge funds do for super rich people. We want to give everyday investors exposure to the profit pools that are going to get created from AI data centers. And so the way you do that is you got to know what goes into AI data centers. So I called this guy that used to work on our team. He used to run manufacturing for us at Tesla. He now runs data center build out at Google. And I said, can you send me, his name's Jon, I said, Jon, can you send me the build sheet for an AI data center? He said, I wouldn't send that to very many people, but we've worked together a long time. Sure, why? And I said, because I have a feeling that 95% of the dollars that are going out in your purchase orders to build these things is not going to NVIDIA. He said, no, like 8%. Clue number 2. The market's weighing NVIDIA at 95%. What's actually going into the boxes is 8% NVIDIA. What's the rest of the content? So he sends us this list, and it's power electronics, and it's substrates, and it's high bandwidth memory, and it's networking software, and it's cooling, and. And so we mapped the build sheet for the AI data center to 60 public stocks. Called a friend of mine who used to be CTO at Meta, asked him the same question, can you send me your build sheet? He's like, sent it, pretty much identical. So we created a basket of stocks that is representative of the dollars that are flowing into purchase orders to build the AI data centers. Seems like an obvious thing that that's the way you would do this. We took a second step and we said, we want to have we know this is at a moment in time, this build sheet, because the tech is changing super rapidly. So we want to get these people on a phone call every month to tell us how their purchases are changing. Turns out nobody had done that in the industry before. So we launched this first product. So you have to go through SEC clearance and all this stuff to launch an ETF. And it's called AIS, AI Infrastructure. As Dave said, it's up close to 200% since inception. It blows away all the benchmarks. We kill Kathy Wood, ARK Invest, like we kill everybody in the
top Morningstar rating.
It's top Morningstar rated. Then we did it for the electric power grid. Then we did it for space and defense and biotech. And it turns out like we're the only ones in the market that build ETFs without a market cap weighted basis because we question this first dumb requirement. And the business went from zero to, it took 11 months to get to its first $1 billion in assets under management. So that means those are the investments. And then it took 3 months to get to its second $1 billion, and it's on its way to 2 months to its third $1 billion. It's the fastest growing ETF platform of all time. Totally credited to step one in the algorithm, which is just question requirements. Like if everybody else says this is the only way to do it, that is clue number one that there might be another way.
Well, I can't wait to see what idea you get after this interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably not
I'm
to
going to
go
run
back,
into somebody
right?
tonight
Yeah,
that's going to plant a seed, I'm sure.
We're running out of time for my questions because we want to get to the audience here. So I'm going to jump to this. The book's been out for about 90 days.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you gotten feedback from the wild as
Yeah,
people implement
tons.
this? Like what's worked or what are people just not getting? Are they giving up too early or?
I don't think, like I haven't heard the counterfactuals
Yep.
as much as I've heard from people like, oh, I've applied this at my veterinary clinic and it works, or oh, I've applied this at my software startup or it worked. And I got some really nice, I've gotten some really nice notes, but I got a really nice note over the weekend from a young entrepreneur who had described the impact as they implemented this. And just the change in management style that this entrepreneur is adopting and how it had just changed her company's trajectory. And so that's been super fulfilling to hear.
Well, Woody DeCafu with Nova Mera here has built an Ask Jon McNeill agent.
That is scary.
Which is freaking
We should
awesome.
kill
I may
that.
not text you anymore because we've got it here. Really a hoot. So VCET, we do a podcast called Start Here, and we're taping for a different version tonight for that. And we learned recently it's amongst the top 5 globally for what people find, which tells you out of 3.7.
That's really awesome.
No, it's got to be hallucination. We keep fact checking, but it tells you how many bad podcasts there are out there. But one of the questions, we ask everybody magic wand question.
Okay.
Okay, and so what founder or leader, past or present, would you want to chat with and why?
Wow. Like the first name that came, I'll just do the first thing that comes to mind. The first name that came to mind is Steve Jobs. I would like to talk to him about the design principles that he could teach me to be able to keep a bar super, super high in design. Because product beauty, I think, is really going to matter in an AI world. Really going to matter. And whether that is the interface that you're putting in front of the user, that's who I'd want to talk to. Like Elon chased him around for years, and Steve and Elon didn't have a great rapport, and so one night, and Steve was always avoiding him or not treating him very well. And one night, Elon managed to corner him and said, "What can you teach me?" And he said, "Just get off my back, I'll teach you one thing. The product has to be so beautiful that you don't need a sales force. That ought to be your standard. The world ought to beat a path to your front door. It should be so beautiful and so unique that you do not need a sales force. And until you've reached that point, you haven't pushed design hard enough." That totally changed Elon's perspective. He's self-taught. He designs the cars.
Wow.
So if you like that shape, the hips of that rear wheel well, If you like the extreme postmodern kind of simplicity in the cabin, that's all him. But it came out of that one conversation. He's like, this has to be so beautiful that people, like, I will not have a sales force. Of course, we still need demand generation, but.
But he also designed a Cybertruck too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. Like, I mean, you know, so.
Exactly, yeah.
There's a place for it, no doubt,
Yeah,
no doubt.
Nobody can
So-
bat 1,000.
All right, you up for a couple questions?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Who's got a question? I'll let Nicole do that. Over here. We got Morgan too.
I love what you have to say about simplifying, questioning the requirements, and deleting. I'm interested in how do you think about prioritizing what remains? So you've got all the things you're going to keep. Now, what's your process for prioritizing those things?
It's kind of like, it's almost an equal weight. I was talking to this guy, some of you might know this name, James Higa. James is one of the leaders of the Open Cloud Foundation, but he was an engineer at Apple, and he became Steve's right hand, and he became the product lead for some of the most important products that Apple introduced. And so I had James take me into the Wayback Machine. A few weeks ago, we were having breakfast, and I said, just describe for me like how you guys treated product requirements, how you ranked them, et cetera. He said, okay, here's how it worked. Steve would grab me and he'd say, okay, James, you're going to be the product lead on the iPod. So this is a big Wayback Machine. You're going back 25 years in the Wayback Machine. And he said, so the way that would work is Steve and the product lead would get into a room and determine the two things that had to be true about the product. Just two. So he said, I spent a week in a room with Steve, and we're going through all the potential requirements you could have for a music player. And eventually we landed on the two, and we emerged from the conference room, and we said, okay, the two things are going to be 1,000 songs, and the user has to get to them in 4 seconds. The song of their choice in 4 seconds. Those are the two things that have to be true, equal weighted. And he said the trick is that no disk technology existed at the time to hold 1,000 songs. And no OS existed at the time to get you to the song in 4 seconds that you were looking for, either in terms of chip speed nor in terms of user interface design. So the two requirements that we were demanding from our engineering and design teams did not yet exist. I said, while the team started to work on that, they would come back and say, hey, Samsung's player has an FM radio. Should we include it? Steve would say, is that 1,000 songs in 4 seconds? No. Then it's not going to be included. And they kept this simple product definition because they knew they were asking engineers to do the impossible, like invent solid-state disk drives that are as big as your thumb. Didn't exist. Solid state didn't exist. Stuff size your thumb didn't exist. The chip to process didn't exist. Johnny Ive's circle design, if you remember that original OS, to dial in the song didn't exist. Like none of the stuff existed. And they kept the teams focused on those two things, launched a product that is then the precursor to the phone that we all use. But those were, his description of how Apple does that requirement ranking is you get down to the two things that have to be true, co-weight those things, and just hold the engineering and design teams accountable to make those things come to life. And when they do, that's enough. And I was like, damn, you're a simplifier. You guys didn't even like think about, like smart people ask these questions, like, hey, if I have to trade one versus the other, or do I equal weight these things? Do I overweight these things? It's like, no, that's all off the table. It's super dead simple. Two things have to be true, make these two things true. That's what the product teams are doing. And I learned a lot from that. I wish I would have had that conversation 25 years ago to be able to learn from it. Hi.
My name's Morgan. I
Hey,
used to
Morgan.
work with you at Lyft, by the way,
Oh, I recognize you.
like a decade ago.
Yeah.
It's cool that you're sending me a contract now. My question is, why does it seem to be so hard for people to implement the algorithm? Because it's not like, it hasn't been a secret, and
No.
like Blue Origin just started blowing up rockets. So like, why is it hard?
I think like 25 years from now, when academics go to study what made Musk such an such an effective industrialist? Like what were in 25 years from now, the politics will be behind us and the behavior will be behind us. And I think they're going to go at like, what are the core kernels or nuggets that this individual utilized to create arguably 5 companies that are worth more than $100 billion and 2 of them are worth more than $1 trillion. Like there's really there's no entrepreneur you can point to on the planet that's even close. Zuck's had one, Ellison's had one, Gates had one, Jobs had 2 if you count Pixar. There's nobody that's even close. And what's the difference? And I think the academics will come to this one thing that he does managerially that most CEOs will not do. And that is, he read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. Has anybody read that book? So that was written in like 2004. And he read it, and he had a very Elon-like response to it, which was 4 hours per company. I could, on a 60-hour work week, run 15 companies. That's pretty cool. And Tim's core point in that book is, as a leader, you have to decide on the two or maybe 3 existential issues that would kill your company if they came true. And as a leader, you only show up to work on those 2 things, and you delegate everything else. And so, like, an example of this is in the car business today. There are 2 existential issues in the North American car business. The first is a number of us believe we're going to go through a flip phone to iPhone moment in cars. The flip phone equivalent is the cars that you drive. The iPhone moment is when a car will drive you for the same price. And the whole market's going to move really suddenly to that, because all of us want to have eyes on screens versus eyes on the road, and it's just going to usher in far higher speeds and far greater safety, and so if you do not have that as a car company, you go the way of Nokia, Motorola, BlackBerry. Those companies didn't fall by 50% or 75%, their market caps fell to 0. They don't exist for the most part today. So that's existential as a car company. That's issue 1. Issue 2 is China's economics in the car business, which the proxy for which is automation. We can't, in the Western world, we don't use subsidies as aggressively and as effectively as the Chinese government does. And so we've got to pick a different point in the battle, and that's automation. So the proxy for automation, third order is robotics. And so he shows up every week at Tesla for 1 day a week and works those 2 issues. And this is the management technique. The management technique is you pick those 2 issues, and you have the engineering teams that are responsible for those, or the business teams if it's a business issue. They've got to come present to the CEO every week. And the CEO is engaged in these 2 problems. And so you can imagine if you're meeting with the CEO, as that team, you are not bringing your B game. You're bringing your A game every week. And he is relentless at pursuing incremental gains, marginal gains every week that stack up to big gains over time. And so that team has to show a marginal gain basically every week. Some little thing they've figured out that he knows is going to eventually lead to a breakthrough. And I used to say to myself, I am pretty sure the CEO of Toyota is not doing this. I am pretty sure that the CEO of Ford is not doing this. And we were having breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough in these areas because he was driving them personally. And I think that's the management technique that is going to be, that I think has to be emulated. So that's why I included it as the kind of key secret ingredient for the algorithm. Like in our days, just like open the kimono a bit for rideshare, there were 2 vectors you could go down. At the time, Uber and Lyft were competing, and Lyft had the advantage because we had delete Uber, because the Uber CEO had so offended the marketplace that we doubled Lyft's market share in a year. And then there were 2 vectors to follow: international expansion and food expansion. And what happened is that Dara put a person in charge of each of those issues, drove it every week. And the founders of Lyft debated whether or not somebody would take a ride in a car that had just delivered Chinese food. And they totally lost the plot. And so one of those companies today is worth $168 billion last time I looked, and one of them is worth $5 billion. And the difference was Dara. The difference was leadership. It wasn't the insight. Both companies had the insight. Both companies had the technical capability. I'd stack a Lyft engineer versus an Uber engineer any day. The difference was the leadership and management. And that's what I think is kind of the secret to Musk, is he does this. But he does this at such a, he's got a super special intellect. And so I write about this, but I was in on these sessions because they were key to the company. And so given that I had the operating role of implementing this stuff, I was in these sessions. And so when the Model X came out, we got immediate market feedback that these 2 second row bucket seats were awesome, but moms really wanted to bench second row because they could put 3 car seats across or 3 kids across. And so we needed to quickly come up with a bench seat. And it turns out those are quite difficult things to engineer because of crash safety. And things have to be bolted to the chassis in a certain way with certain strength, tensile strength and torque strength so they don't break in an accident. And so one of the first meetings, they came in with the design for the bench seat, and they showed us the bracket that would connect the chassis to the seat, to the bench. And Elon was looking at that, questioning the angle. And so he asked the engineer that was in charge of that, essentially a metal triangle, what the formula was for the torque that thing would take. And the guy said, I got it on my CAD, but I don't know off the top of my heart. And Elon said, well, I do. And he walked to the whiteboard and wrote it.
That's a flex.
That's a special intellect that can do that, and yeah, it's a flex. But the reason the effectiveness of the flex was, everybody left that meeting, and the buzz in the hallways was, you better know your stuff when you go into these sessions, because this guy knows his stuff. He's going to ask you the formula. That was like viral through the engineering org. Next week, people are showing up. They got all the answers way before he does. And the engineers have stepped up their game. And so it was a flex, yeah, but it's a management technique to say, I care about this so much that I'm going to know at least as much as you do.
Was it still principally at the Fremont facility at that point versus globally distributed?
Yeah, we only had, at that point in time with the X, we only had the Fremont manufacturing, and then we had Palo Alto engineering. So the engineering teams were all, unless they were manufacturing engineers, they were not at the factory, they were in Palo Alto.
So when Mary Barr at GM has this same insight, how does that go to 200,000 people?
It's really hard.
600 facilities?
It's really hard,
Okay.
yeah. It's 100,000 people across 35 facilities, it's really hard.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a question just about requirement creation. You've spoken a little bit about here and there, but there's sort of an art to it in so many ways.
Yeah.
Where I could say, hey, this is the wire I need in this thing, but maybe I just need a wire. I don't need a brand. Or like, what's the right size? And like, maybe speaking it to like at the top level, very small, like broad things, obviously effective or simple. But maybe like a couple steps down too. So like from the highest level of requirements, but then like breaking that down to different teams, or maybe a couple examples of like the range of a right-sized requirement. How do you choose them and create them? A lot of this is about simplifying and getting rid of things, but there's probably an art on the other side.
Definitely. So a company we started about a year and a half ago is in supply chain optimization. So if you're producing stuff, like if you're making robots or whatever, your demand is shifting around all the time. Customers are canceling orders, changing orders, adding orders, and you're shooting signals into the supply chain all the time based on that, and stuff is changing and the supply chain gets all messed up. And so most companies manage that on spreadsheets. And big companies use planning tools like Relics and Adapar. But none of them are that dynamic. And so this, like what supply chain people know is this stuff is moving around all the time, and you never have the right stuff on the shelf, period. So we took a team out of Tesla that solved that problem for us in 2017, 2018 with ML, which was state-of-the-art at the time. Turns out it's super hard math to get that done, and so they had developed this ML system. We pulled them out a year and a half ago and said, how would you like to build this for the world using modern AI tools? And we started with the requirement of, we need to be able to take any product company and balance their demand and supply through their inventory and supply chain. That's the problem we're going to solve. And we're going to define that as the supply chain planner can sleep at night. That was the first thing. So we would go then talk to customers. We talked to, as a rule, when we started business, we talked to at least 150 customers. We went and talked to 150 supply chain planners, said, we're going to create a system that helps you sleep at night. And it does so by balancing these things. And what else would it need to have? And then it kind of gets us a list of like maybe a dozen requirements of the product that would need to be true. So we know we have to build these. So we start building, and then we find out that when we're implementing the software that we've built, which it's a super cool architecture of deterministic code, search index, small model, large model, harness around it, calling the right things at the right time. Super cool thing. And the biggest bottleneck to deploying it was getting the business rules that existed in everybody's heads in the organization. Almost none of this stuff is written down, so you can't train a model on an organization. So then we said, okay, to the engineers, the key feature that we have to build now is we have to be able to somehow absorb the business rules within a day. Because it was taking us 30 to 40 days of human beings absorbing these business rules through interviews. And we said, we want to go from 30 days to a day. Often when you give, it's a second Musk management secret, Morgan, like you give 3 orders of magnitude difference in the goal. So the goal was the current status is 30 to 40 days. 3 orders of magnitude is get me down to 3 hours, essentially. So they go to work on that problem, and over time they developed this agentic approach where they could go in, watch the transactions and decisions that humans had, or the actions humans had taken, and they could discern why, what the outcome is, and therefore what the reason must have been. And they could absorb the business rules through this learning. And that learning happened in 3 hours of training. And so they got this capability built that can absorb somebody's business rules same day and implement them. So that means if you're like one of their newest and biggest customers is DoorDash's grocery business, which is going to be as big as Instacart's in a couple of months, so it's big. And they got all these products and all these demand signals, and they were able to absorb the business rules in a day, turn that on for Instacart, and they started to save $1.5 million a day. And so to pull back from that initial spec was let the planner sleep at night, ask them how they do. You get 12 features, you build those 12 features, but then to make your business work, now I need the engineers to develop one feature, which is understand and absorb the business rules into the system in less than a day. And that became the key feature to build. And now we're just going to stop for a bit and now let this roll into the market. Because again, like for technology builders, we want to keep adding feature set and robustness and in this mission because our venture investors want us to build platforms, not endpoint solutions. And it's like, no, just let this thing bake for a while before we totally unsimplify it or complicate it.
John, thank you so much for your time. Your calendar is so full, I can't imagine you want to come up here for a couple hours and be with us.
I have a soft spot in my heart for entrepreneurs, and I have a soft spot in my heart for the Green Mountain State, so this is a pretty easy thing. When you asked, I was like, absolutely.
Hell, why did it take me so long to ask? I'm like, shoot, I got to get back to my question every requirement. Thank you all for coming out tonight here on a Monday to OnLogic. Thank you to Lisa and Roland Greneveld and Jared and the team for providing this wonderful space. This is one of our fast-growing companies in our little state.
Yeah, for sure.
And so many others. Just meet, mingle, have some more fun here tonight. Thank you, John. And don't forget, if you need something around your business, start here with VCET.
Yeah.
Have a good night, folks.
Thanks.